One step past.
Action heroes of history. The two Graces. Shipwreck saviors. Two young women named Grace. Both became national heroes for saving shipwreck survivors. They never got a chance to meet each other. Time and geography set them apart. Their stories, however, do have similarities. Grace number 1. Grace Darling. The first Grace lived in northeast England, specifically in Northumberland County. It was September 7th, 1838. Grace Darling was the 22-year-old daughter of a lighthouse keeper. Her bedroom was high up in Longstone Lighthouse. Very early that morning, Grace looked out her window and spotted the shipwreck of the Forfarshire. It was a paddle steamer that had run aground on Big Harker, a low, rocky island. Half of the ship had sunk during the night. More importantly, Grace saw survivors on Big Harker. She alerted her father, William, and they were quick to action. The weather was rough, and there was no time to lose. It wasn't just the waves they had to worry about, there were rocks. Father and daughter set out in a rowing boat. It was 21 feet long, and an open fishing boat known as a coble. Not very big for all the people they had to rescue. Plus, the boat was made to be rowed by 4 people, and it was just the 2 of them. Since the weather was so bad, the Darlings went a mile around the island to avoid getting smashed up against the rocks. Grace knew what she was doing, and she rowed for all she was worth. She and her father finally reached the survivors. While William helped the survivors get into the boat, Grace kept the boat steady. The first time out, Grace and William could only bring back 5 survivors. 4 of these were men, and 1 was a woman. They rowed back to the lighthouse. Now they had to go back to get the remaining 4 survivors. William now had 3 other men to help him row these rough, tough waters. Grace, the woman, and 1 of the men stayed behind at the lighthouse. Her father managed to bring the other survivors to safety. A rescue boat set out from Sea Houses, then called North Sunderland. By the time the boat and the 7-man crew arrived at Big Harker, all the work had been done. The weather was way too bad for them to sail back to Sea Houses. Instead, they rowed to Longstone Lighthouse for shelter. The weather remained terrible for 3 days. All 7 men from the rescue lifeboat and all 9 shipwreck survivors had to stay at the lighthouse with the Darlings. When news of Grace's part in the rescue reached the public, things blew up. She instantly became the nation's heroine, a role that she found to be overwhelming. Grace and her father were both awarded the Silver Medal for Bravery from what is now called the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. In addition to the medal and all the acclaim, Grace received a hefty financial award, including money from Queen Victoria. Many portrait painters came from all over to capture her likeness. She got hundreds of gifts, letters, and even marriage proposals. Grace's wealth and fame came so fast that the Duke of Northumberland became her self-appointed guardian and founder of a trust that would protect her money. The Duke, as well, gave presents to Grace and her family. Sadly, Grace Darling didn't enjoy her celebrity status for very long. She died just 4 years later, at the age of 26, on October 20th, 1842. The cause of death was tuberculosis. Did all the attention she received and the new responsibilities that came with her money take a toll on her health? That part is speculation. What isn't speculation is the fact that people loved her then and continue to hold her in high regard. Grace Darling and her family are buried in St. Aidan's Churchyard in Bamborough. Besides an impressive headstone, Grace has a monument north of her grave. It is an effigy of Grace sleeping, holding an oar, and was made to be a landmark for passing sailors. The church at St. Aidan's also has a stained glass window in her memory. The love that Grace Darling has continued to receive is unreal. Songs and poems have been written about her. Her name and likeness has graced everything from candy bars to boats to the Grace Darling Hotel of Melbourne, Australia, in operation since 1854. Grace number 2, Grace Bussell. The second Grace lived in Australia, near a town called Margaret River in the southwest area of Western Australia. Grace Bussell was born almost 18 years after the death of Grace Darling. The stories of the two Graces share a lot of similarities, but there are some distinct differences. Both Graces knew great wealth. Grace Bussell, however, was born into it. She came from an old, prominent family that was one of the first to settle in the Southwest. In their employ was a 25-year-old Aboriginal stockman by the name of Sam Isaacs. It was his job to look after the family's livestock. Sam figures big into this story. Very big. You can't tell the story without him. Like Grace Darling before her, Grace Bussell would be accompanied by an older adult male. It was on December 1st, 1876, that Grace and Sam would forever be branded as national heroes. The SS Georgette was a steamship carrying 50 passengers. Sometime after midnight, the ship had sprung a leak, and the pumps would not work. The ship's engine then caught on fire. By 4 a.m., all the passengers and crew were bailing water with buckets while the captain steered for the coast. By 6 a.m., the rising waters had put out the engine's fire. The ship was going down, no doubt about it. Captain John Godfrey finally gave the orders to man the lifeboats. The first lifeboat that was lowered was thrown against the ship's side by a big wave and snapped in half. Some of the people in that boat were saved by a second lifeboat, but 12 lives had already been lost. The SS Georgette continued to drift into the surf at Calgardup Bay. This is when it was seen by Sam Isaacs. Isaacs walked as fast as he could to Wallcliffe, which was the name of the Bussell homestead. It was 20 kilometers away. That's over 12 miles. He alerted the Bussells about what was going on. Alfred Bussell, the head of the family, gave Sam some ropes, gear, and a horse for the rescue. Alfred's 16-year-old daughter, Grace, insisted on accompanying Sam on horseback. She was a take-charge girl. By the time Sam and Grace arrived, the ship was hung up on the rocks and splintering apart fast. People were getting into the ship's lifeboats, but they were stuck. All of a sudden, they looked up, and on top of a steep cliff was a young girl on a horse. This is a visual that made a lasting impression on the survivors for the rest of their lives. It didn't seem likely that a horse could come down such a steep cliff, but it did, and at full speed. There were lives to be saved. Grace did this without care of her own personal risk. The pounding surf made it incredibly difficult, but she made it to the lifeboat that held many panicked women and children. Grace's horse stumbled over a rope. She and the horse were almost lost, but managed to stay upright. Many women and children grabbed onto Grace and the horse, even the horse's tail. Grace and her mighty steed safely brought the people to shore. Then, as far as what has officially been stated, she went in again and again. Sam Isaacs also went into the water on horseback, and, like Grace, had people cling on to him and the horse. In all, it took 4 hours to rescue 50 people. The SS Georgette and every lifeboat was capsized. This was a difficult rescue, but the survivors were grateful and had a shared memory that would make the history books. They were taken to the Bussells' homestead where they were fed and given dry clothing. Grace and Sam were hailed as heroes. Grace received a silver medal from the Royal Humane Society and a gold watch. She was nicknamed the Grace Darling of the West, or sometimes the Grace Darling of Western Australia. Sam was given a bronze medal and 100 acres of land from the state government. This was significant because it was the first time an Aboriginal person received a land grant in Western Australia. Grace had a number of places named in her honor. North of where Grace lived is now a town called Gracetown. Also in Western Australia is the town of Lake Grace. In the town of Cook, a suburb of Australia's capital city of Canberra, is a street called Bustle Crescent. It took longer for Sam Isaacs to be properly noticed for his actions. It was 1876, and Sam was downplayed in the press, often being referred to as Grace's black servant. Over time, he has been given more of the attention he deserves. This isn't downplaying Grace Bustle's part of the rescue at all, but Sam Isaacs was also a big part. In 2021, a locality called Yebble, after Sam Isaacs' middle name, was established close to the land he was given by the government so many years before. At the time of the rescue, and for many years after, Grace Bustle had gotten all the hype. In more recent years, speculation has been raised about what she actually did or didn't do in the rescue. A grandson of one of Sam Isaacs' friends said that Sam basically did everything and Grace only played a small part. I think the important question to ask is, did Sam Isaacs really say that? I don't entirely trust anything said that comes by way of a relative of a friend. I do believe Sam Isaacs was important to the rescue. I don't believe Grace Bustle was a hoax. 50 people were saved, and I think it's odd that, in all the years since the rescue, none of them said anything about Grace not being helpful. Unlike Grace Darling before her, it would seem Grace Bustle was more comfortable with her celebrity. She definitely lived a full life. Grace married and had 7 children. She died in 1935 at the age of 75. Sam had already been married at the time of the rescue and ultimately had 6 children. He died in 1920 at about 75 years old after falling from a horse sulky. In 1936, all of the land he had received from the government was sold by his sons. Amazing Graces. Grace Darling. Grace Bustle. 2 young women who put themselves in danger to save people they didn't know. They didn't do it for fame or fortune. They did it because it was the right thing to do. Saving shipwreck survivors is a hard job for even the strongest man. Their actions were certainly newsworthy back then, and will always be impressive. No doubt about it, the 2 Graces will always be true action heroes of history.